Hey everyone, welcome back to TCO Studios. It's time for another edition of the Pick Six. I'm your host, Mike Wobschall. Thank you for sending in your questions. Now let's give you some answers and let's get to work. Question number one comes from Randy in Ontario. Nice to see the additions for the offensive line, but I don't have a warm and fuzzy feeling about it. Could be a hangover from 2018 when I really believed the problems had been fixed. Once bitten, twice shy. Well, Randy, I understand the frustration. The Vikings have been working for a few years now to improve that offensive line, but I think they may have done it this time around. Lots of time invested in improving this group, and I think it's going to bear fruit in 2019. First-round pick Garrett Bradbury inserted at center, which moves a third-round pick, Pat Elflein, to left guard. Remember, we have Riley Reiff, a solid veteran at left tackle, and a second-round pick from last year at right tackle. So lots of high draft picks and even a free agent signing this year, Josh Klein, in the interior of the offensive line. As I said, I think this group is already gelling, and I think the effort, both draft picks and free agents, that effort is going to bear fruit for the Vikings up front in 2019. Question number two comes from Roger in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. I was excited when the Vikings drafted Dru Samia. How is he performing, and does he have a shot at becoming the starter at right guard? Well, Dru Samia was a fourth-round pick for the Vikings out of the University of Oklahoma this year. He blocked for some very talented players in the Big 12, and he's going to be blocking for some talented players here with the Vikings. Now, Josh Klein is sort of penciled in as that starter at right guard, and I don't know if Dru Samia will unseat him right away this season. But I think when you look down the line later in the season, or maybe in Dru's second or third season, I think he has the ceiling to be a starter at offensive guard in this league. I know the Vikings are excited about his future. Next question comes from Noel in Bayfield, Wisconsin. Historically, under Coach Zimmer, how many offensive and defensive linemen have the Vikings had on the 53-man roster? Well, traditionally, you're going to keep somewhere between 8 and 10, maybe 11 if you're really deep and good up front on the offensive and defensive line. And remember, that 53-man roster, it gets pared down to just 46 on game day. But yeah, 8 to 10 is where you're going to see. And these positions, they're going to be fun to watch during training camp. Not just the starting position, but some of the battles that the Vikings will have for depth on the interior of the offensive and defensive line. It's going to be fun to watch. And training camp is really where it happens because that's where the guys put on the pads. And that's where you can evaluate the trenches. Next question comes from James. So, RB2 discussion doesn't even acknowledge Mike Boone's existence? Oversight, or with good reason? Well, James is referencing a question I answered in the Monday morning mailbag a couple of weeks ago talking about RB2. And yes, I didn't mention Mike Boone's name specifically, but he's definitely in the mix for the Vikings at running back. Remember last summer how good Mike Boone looked in training camp in the preseason? Well, he looks as good or even better this time around. So I think both Mike Boone and Rock Thomas, who also had a good summer last year, yes, their names are going to be mentioned in competition for spots on this roster. They're going to have to show where they can help on special teams if they want to get a spot on this roster too. Next question comes from Chris in California. The articles and draft profilers I read about Armen Watts had him as a fourth-round pick. Why are the Vikings so good at drafting such solid players in the later rounds? Armen Watts, going to be fun to watch him in training camp because he looked pretty good in shorts, helmets, and shells in the spring, and I really want to see him in pads. He came on very strongly in his final season at the University of Arkansas, and I think with the coaching here in Minnesota, Andre Patterson and Robert Rodriguez, Armen Watts definitely has a future. Speaking of coaching, that's the key to making late-round draft picks work out. You need to develop those players in their first and second seasons, and that's how you can get mid- and late-round draft picks to work out. Just look at guys like Danielle Hunter and Stephon Diggs, mid-round picks who've become stars in the NFL. Next question comes from Chris. The Vikings do an excellent job of drafting guys with versatility and high character. We've yet to get the elusive championship, but I can smell it stronger than ever now. Love that optimism, Chris, but you're right. The Vikings do focus on guys who are versatile. Like, look at a guy like Adam Thielen. We hear that guy right there, Rick Spielman, and head coach Mike Zimmer talk all the time about Adam Thielen's versatility. He came up as a special teams guy, carved out a niche for himself on the roster. Now he's a star on offense. and he still has versatility because he can play on the outside or in there as a slot receiver. Harrison Smith, same type of guy, has very high character, very competitive, cares about the team, and he's a versatile guy who can defend against the run, he can blitz, and he can cover. How about a guy like Anthony Barr? Had the choice to go somewhere else for more money, but decided to stay here with the Vikings. A guy of great character and integrity. And then you get guys who are very community conscious, guys like Xavier Rhodes, Kyle Rudolph, Harrison Smith. They give a lot back to the local community as well, and that's important to Mike Zimmer, Rick Spielman, and Vikings ownership. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Pick Six. We will be back next week with another edition, so please continue to submit your questions using the email address at the bottom of the screen, and we'll see you next week.